28th work session. During the work session, we do not take public comment, but we hope that you will stay engaged and come to our 5:30 business meeting where we do take public comment. We're talking about our Housing and Homelessness Strategic Plan update. This is a work in progress, and I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
And I will pretty quickly turn it over to Jill Joliker to introduce the team working on this. Jill?
Thanks, Sarah. Let me real quick get the PowerPoint set up.
Jill, could we have everyone introduce themselves while you're doing that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So I'll let Shannon Oury start.
As she said, I'm Shannon Oury. I'm with the Housing Authority.
Matthew Falk, Director of Housing, Burton Nash.
Carl Wu with Artists Helping the Homeless.
Bob Tryansky, Director of Behavioral Health Projects for Douglas County.
And then there's a few other, let's see, Melissa Nolte, I know is with the stakeholder group is online. Melissa, would you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Melissa Nolte and I'm with Kansas Legal Services, grant writer and website coordinator.
Thanks, Melissa. And I want to make sure we have what I wanted to make sure I recognize Gabby Sprague. Yeah, come on up. Gabby's coming up and I'll let her introduce herself. And Jasmine Bates is our AmeriCorps worker with our Housing and Human Services program as well. But Gabby, go ahead and introduce yourself.
As Jill said, Gabby Sprague, I'm the Housing and Human Services Program Manager for Douglas County.
Eric, can you help me? I did something. I pushed the wrong button. Sorry. We'll be joined by a couple other folks that are in our stakeholder group for this project in just a little bit. And I know that Hannah Ballard with the City of Lawrence communications team is here. We've got some friends with Artists Helping the Homeless that have been incredibly supportive of a lot of this work that I want to make sure I'm acknowledging. And I'm sure we'll have some more folks from our project team be a part of this conversation as we move along. I don't know what I did. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Commissioners, we are back here with you all, a lot of the same people back in April, and we shared a draft version of our community strategic plan to address housing and homelessness in Douglas County. It's a city-county joint effort, but we work with a great group of collaborative stakeholders that have been working together as a collective impact group since April of 2021. So I'm going to jump into that and I'm going to revisit a little bit of the foundational aspects of this plan, some background information just to remind folks where we started and where we are now. But the first place I want to start is that we have an official name for this plan. You can see it up at the top, and that is A Place for Everyone, a community plan to end homelessness. That was developed through our steering committee and our stakeholder group. And here's a listing of all of our stakeholders that are represented in that group of folks that meet on a monthly basis, but also meet throughout the month on focus groups to develop this plan. And that work continues. And I'll talk more about that in the coming slides. So just again, to quickly touch on where we are, where we've been, just to remind folks about this process. We did a couple needs assessments last year that we were in front of you all talking about. The Corporation for Supportive Housing did a supportive housing needs assessment. And then the KU Center for Public Partnerships and Research did a needs assessment on our homeless system. Both of those were completed about this time last year. And with the results of those, we were able to identify some focus groups, focus areas, and then organize ourselves into those focus areas to start developing the plan that we have been sharing with community members over the last couple of months. And then we have a steering committee that meets each month in addition to the group of stakeholders to just make sure we're continuing to make progress and do some decision making. So the goal statement, the goal of the Homelessness and Housing Steering Committee is to develop a strategic planning framework that addresses homelessness and the need for affordable housing solutions throughout Douglas County. Our objective is to create by 2028 to create a system that achieves functional zero through policy, system, and environmental changes, resulting in all Douglas County residents having access to the fundamental human right of safe, accessible, attainable, and affordable housing, in which homelessness is a rare and brief occurrence. Here are our priority populations. I think a lot of you all have seen these slides, but we're very intentional about. These are the folks that we're focusing our strategies on. And these are some of the strategies and approaches that we're going to use. So since we last met, we had 5 listening sessions. We had one that was virtual in April, and then we had 2 in-person sessions that were open to all community members. One that was at the Union Depot, and then we had one that was at the Lawrence Library. And then we had 2 sessions that were just for folks that were currently experiencing homelessness. One of those sessions was at the Union Depot, and then one of those sessions was with guests at the Lawrence Community Shelter. Overall, there were more than 200 participants in those sessions. I'd say we had close to 65 participants at 60 to 65 participants at the community events, and similar numbers at the lived experience sessions. And then we had just a phenomenal response from volunteer facilitators and note takers. So a lot of the folks that are in this room today, I want to acknowledge their work facilitating note taking, a lot of really challenging conversations to make this process successful. Put some nice pictures in of those sessions. So these pictures here are from the session that was at the Union Depot in early May. Another one here, and then Lawrence Public Library. Yeah, a lot of nice pictures from that. It was a great outcome. But what we want to share with you all today is what we heard. So what we heard in those listening sessions, and what I'm going to share with you all is I gave our stakeholder group a homework assignment. I shared with them the notes that were compiled, exhaustive amount of notes that were compiled from all those notes and flip charts from those listening sessions. I asked folks to go and review them, and for a lot of folks, they didn't need to review them because they sat through all of them. But how do we identify what are the top things, the top themes that we heard in those lessons? The first one is the importance of centering and compensating those with lived experience in program design and strategic planning, and just how important it is to incorporate peers into every aspect of what we do. I know that we were just talking about the work of peers and the county's investment in the Peer Fellows program in particular, most recently. So I know this is the role that peers play in our community is something that's really close to home for this organization, but we heard it a lot in those listening sessions. The second thing that we heard that was probably most urgent and alarming to a lot of us in the steering committee and the larger group was that we need to prioritize meeting health, dignity, safety, and well-being needs of our unhoused community members. So everything from, there's a lot of profound hunger issues right now, access to toilets and basic hygiene, showering, storage. I see I have food on there twice, sorry. But that came up over and over and over again. And I'm going to come back to how important that is and where we think we need to go with that. But then we also heard that in order to reach our goals, that there are organizational capacity issues that must be addressed to provide sufficient services and housing with the necessary supports. So I think there's a lot of awareness that staff in a lot of the primary response agencies are at their limits. They're at capacity. And there's and our folks that are currently experiencing homelessness know that the agencies are at capacity and it's difficult to meet the needs right now. And if we're going to make progress on this plan and commit to this plan, we're going to have to demonstrate have some impact on organizational capacity that exists today. And then we also heard that there's more community engagement and education that is needed to increase community buy-in and willingness to implement the plan and invest in solutions. So we need more data sharing to document the need that's a public and private facing. And then we need to better understand and share what are some of the key characteristics of folks that are experiencing homelessness. So really figuring out how we can document folks that not only meet that HUD definition of homelessness, but folks that don't meet that definition, folks that are couch surfing, folks that are sleeping in their cars. Those are a lot of the folks that our friends at Family Promise are serving every day that we're not documenting, that we need to do a better story of telling that story, better job at telling that story. I wanted to go back briefly to share on number 2, safety is highlighted there. And I got some feedback from one of our stakeholder members when I asked for them to do that homework assignment. And one of the comments that was shared that I think really addresses some of the safety concerns that were shared multiple times in our listening session was that we need to address the violence against people experiencing homelessness, including sexual violence and coercion for female identified community members. And I'd be remiss if I didn't remind folks of the finding that was in our Corporation for Supportive Housing Needs Assessment and the KU Needs Assessment that we have disparate amounts of females that experience homelessness in this community compared to the nation and the state. So we've got to do a better job of understanding what's happening in our community and the safety issues that we heard over and over again. We've got to pay attention to. Continuing on with the key themes that we heard in the listening sessions, there's a significant need for additional accessible, affordable, quality, and person-centered housing for unique populations. So thinking women, men, families, men, LGBTQ plus, transition age youth, and more. There's a power imbalance between folks that can be labeled as NIMBYs, not in my backyards, and that are also can be considered well-resourced homeowners and business owners compared to low-income community members who lack power and representation compared to others. We've got to figure out a way to address that power imbalance and create spaces where we can make progress. And then we heard that there's more details that are needed to inform the plan. How much will it cost to implement? Where is the funding going to come from? And who's going to benefit from the services and resources? And who's responsible and how will they be held accountable for the plan? So that's how we tried to describe what we heard in the listening sessions. But I want another interpretation of what we heard is things are bad and they're worse than we thought. Service providers are at their limits. We need more time to develop the plan. We're going to need more money. This is risky, but the good news is we're not giving up. And these bullets, in a lot of ways come out of some really hard debrief conversations that the stakeholder group and the steering committee had coming out of the listening sessions, really feeling like, where do we go from here? We heard a lot of really hard things. We don't feel like we have what we need to move into operationalizing this plan. There's a lot of questions that we need to answer, and we don't feel equipped to answer them. So when myself and my colleagues with City Lawrence City Manager's Office and Leah Roslin with the Affordable Housing Manager, we met with Sarah and Craig Owens with the City of Lawrence, and we shared this with them, and this is where we're at. And they agreed. And Sarah did a really nice job of helping me tee up these bullet points here, but she was right on. And she really, helped us distill where we're at with this and what we're going to come back, what we're coming to you today, where we want to go with this plan. So when we were last with you, we thought we'd be coming to you and say, hey, here's what we heard in the listening sessions. We incorporated into the plan, ready to go. We're not ready to do that right now. But what we are recommending where we go from here is that we continue to prioritize community engagement and education and listening sessions. There's a lot of support to continue doing listening sessions with women, listening sessions with families, and continuing our conversations with our folks experiencing homelessness. So that's the things that we're going to prioritize right now. Our diversity, our equity and inclusion focus group is committed to elevating the strategies that they already had in our plan that speak to community engagement, education, and listening sessions. And they're going to be working to organize those efforts. But then we need to document the immediate, short, less than a year, and long-term 1 to 3 year cost estimates to implement this plan. Some of those immediate plans are, how do we understand how we can support those basic safety, health and well-being and feeding needs of our community right now? What that looks like, I don't have all the answers, but I know conversations are happening. And there's opportunities to look at what peer communities are doing to meet this need. I know I was at the Kansas Homeless Conference this past month and sat next to some folks in Topeka about a mobile unit that goes out. That's a collaborative effort. We can come up with similar solutions here if we have the support to do that kind of work. We have people that are already doing that kind of work, but we need more of them. And, my best example of that is, the work that Artists Helping the Homeless has been doing at the city supported site. Nobody asked them to show up. They just keep showing up, and it's tremendous. And there's more folks that are doing that kind of work. We're going to continue to develop the plan between now and December. Our work groups are going to keep meeting. And we're going to take all the feedback and continue to do our work. But then where we're at with you all today is that we need we're asking our elected officials and our, county administrator to help us have some brave and strong leadership, demonstrate brave and strong leadership in supporting solutions to homelessness that does and will end and will have community opposition. We know that we're going into some significant headwinds with this work based on what we heard the last couple months. I want to briefly touch on, what this is costing our community today. So starting just with our organization, I just wanted to touch on, where the county's investments are as it relates to some of the things that we heard in listening sessions are key factors to folks' housing instability and homelessness. So that's everything from having access to treatment to having safe, accessible housing and having the kind of resources that are needed to stay housed. So I've given you a snapshot of what the county's FY 2023 budget reflects. And not everything that we fund is directly for folks that are experiencing homelessness, but it sure helps. And it looks like that this is prevention from our perspective, I think, as an organization. So $9.5 million.
Light. Yeah.
It might be, yeah. I think that was just a starting point. But there's probably more I left out. So this is not the best illustration either, but just to give a sense of how we're spending money today. I think, commissioners are aware that utilizing the data that we have in my RC, my resource connection, in that client privacy protected client care coordination database, we're able to see folks that are having multiple visits to the emergency room, folks that are having multiple ambulance runs. And one of the through lines to a lot of the folks that can be categorized as frequent utilizers are familiar faces. That's another term we can use for them. Homelessness is more often than not a through line for a lot of these folks. So Well, I don't have information to document that all of the 222 people in this example are homeless or housing insecure. It's an example of what the cost looks like when you see multiple ER visits, multiple ambulance visits for folks that maybe could receive a lower cost solution. The cost of, for example, what is it costing to provide emergency services and supports for folks that are at the city supported campsite? That number, when we think about what those numbers cost, that's a lot of rent, as we could say. That could help build a lot of housing. My point of that is that we're spending money today. We're spending a lot of money, but if we are more thoughtful about it, we can maybe have different impact. So one of the tasks that we're going to work on is trying to put an initial estimate to implement the plan. So we're just at the starting point here, a lot of TBDs. But what I can say about supportive housing, which is the focus area that I am the lead facilitator of, with a lot of folks in this room, is we do have a good cost estimate of what it would take to be successful with this plan. And these numbers come out of what we got from the Corporation for Supportive Housing in that needs assessment. They gave us information about what the capital would look, an estimated capital cost, but more importantly, what's that ongoing cost for us? What are the supportive services? What are the operating costs that we would need to sustain this work moving into the future? So, did you have a question, Shannon?
Yeah, thanks, Jill. I'm just curious if that the capital cost includes or accounts for the investments that we've made through ARPA projects,
It does not.
which are not all realized yet. Okay. And
It
our
does
ARPA
not.
projects were 10 million, give or
Yes.
take.
Yes.
Okay.
And that was not on, that was in my notes from the slide, one of the previous slides that we $10.6 million in ARPA funds for 182 new units was what we estimated. So it's not reflective of that cost. This number, the 35.2 million, is what is in the supportive housing strategic plan, the units that are identified there.
Yeah, that's what I remembered too, but I didn't go back and cross-reference. So just wanted to make sure you didn't subtract the 10.6
Yeah.
and just know that the 10.6 of investments that we've made, the amount of units is it's a first step.
Yep.
So thanks.
Yeah. And these numbers here are not reflective of everything that was in that needs assessment from the Corporation for Supportive Housing. This is just for the priority populations that we've identified in the supportive housing strategic plan. So chronic homeless population, chronic homeless families, justice involved individuals, folks with substance use, mental illness, transition age youth, and respite care, I think, are the categories of supportive housing that we have in that plan. And this addresses that need. Our other groups are going to keep working to put these numbers together, and we'll keep our stakeholders involved as we move forward. But one thing I want to say here, the feedback that we got that, we need to put cost estimates to this. Yes, I understand that. But I think, one of the things that we felt really strongly about was just getting buy-in for this plan in the first place. Before we started dreaming and creating plans, we wanted to know what's realistic and what's the community supportive of, and what are our elected officials supportive of as well. So I'm going to end on this slide. I'm going to go right back to where I was just a few slides ago, where we go from here. And it's really number 4 that we're kind of I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to stop sharing and see what questions you all have. And you've got a really tremendous group of folks in this room. And there's a few more folks that came in. I know Dana Ortiz with Family Promises here. Dana, if you want to come up and sit, we got another chair if you want to. I'd love to have you. So thank you.
Thank you, Jill. And first I want to say, I want to thank you for including this slide that talks about what some of the costs are now for frequent users of emergency services. It's something that we've started to ask some of our other community partners, especially in the like the recovery, substance recovery partners to say, how do we quantify we can't really quantify the cost it is to the individual that's living through that, but some of the dollars in terms of how do we justify working upstream from some of those people that are struggling. So putting some dollar figures in that 6.9 million for the 222 top users of emergency services is a pretty eye-opening number. So these numbers are real and significant, and something we need to keep talking about for not only housing and homelessness, but all other kind of services that we do. Do any of our other partners here kind of want to weigh in on their reaction to the community listening sessions, other things that you heard? Because I'll mention a couple if nobody else does.
I think one of the things that this does, as we listen to all the conversations, is it gives us some new boxes of curiosity to look at, right? So, when we're doing needs assessments and we're coming up with strategic plans, you start with that idea of what do we know? What don't we know? What do we still need to know? And I think particularly in this area, Commissioner, that you're raising on costs, I think we have a little bit of a blueprint of where we want to explore. But I think there's a lot of work to be done still to sort of come up with real costs that we know are solid, and also looking at the time horizon that it takes to start to realize some of the cost offsets. So if you look at what we had invested, how the county has invested in trying to reduce the number of behavioral health crisis visits to the emergency room, right? I mean, that was a clear focus of we've made a lot of progress on that even before some of these new resources have come online. So there's a cost benefit that we can see there, but then there's a significant investment upfront, and it's going to take a while before the cost per episode. So we start to see that transition. And so I think it's important to say this is a time horizon project that we have to look at. And I think we need to start to get specific on, from the county's perspective, what do we still need to know and what do we want to understand in terms of determining what investments make sense.
I want to have a couple of observations about kind of the community engagement, community listening piece. And I think it's some things that we're so used to thinking about it that maybe it doesn't get spoken about at this level. And that's what I hear in the community is downtown, impacts on downtown, impacts on businesses. And I recognize that is referring to like one population of many populations that we're talking about in this plan. And some of them, and this one is more visible, many of them are less visible. But it's within that community conversation, I think folks really want to hear us talk about downtown, impacts on downtown, and folks, especially that you have a public substance use. So I think those two things, just making sure that we interweave our community conversation around the things that we're hearing from the public pretty regularly, I think will be important for community buy-in. I don't know if others want to react to that at all.
Shannon, you start and then we'll go to Melissa. She's got something to offer.
Okay. So I will say one of the other populations I think it's critical that we engage are the landlords, because there has been some real contention in the last year. There's some real issues. I think we heard some comments from there's been a lot of public meetings. Some were this and some were the source of income ordinance. I attended all the source of income ordinance ones, and there's some real pushback. And quite frankly, I do believe we're going to need to rely on our government bodies to help us fund some supportive housing that some of us need to run. But in the end, part of the solution is with our private landlords. We cannot build the number of, our government bodies cannot build the number of units that we need. And so that is, Jill was listing off the groups of people we need to have listening sessions with. And that's one of them, even though sometimes that's very difficult. trust me, I sat there as we were regularly attacked for the source of income ordinance. But they are a group that we are going to, similar to downtown, that we need to hear what they have to say and see if there's some ground that we can make up, because we have almost 900 vouchers, and each one of those is only as good as the landlord I have to take it. And so that's another piece that I really think we need to add to this plan, is to make sure we are engaging with the landlords, because they're critical to our solution.
Thanks, Shannon. Melissa, go ahead.
Okay, I heard this in all of the listening sessions that I attended, and I hear it almost every day when I start talking about homelessness in Lawrence. And that is all the misconceptions about homeless people and the anger around, why are we focusing on this, just bust them out of town. And there's just so much community misunderstanding, and in the PowerPoint, it was noted that we need to be brave and, be able to answer questions. There's going to be a lot of that, and it's a fight. I just talked with one of my best friends today who said, I saw in the Lawrence Journal World, why is, $35 million going to be spent on? People do not understand. There's a lot of community engagement to do, and I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yeah, and I wanted, thanks, Melissa. And in the PowerPoint, there was a bullet that I had in my other interpretation slide of this is risky. I want to speak to that directly, that is related to, that came out of one example in particular. Our colleagues at the City of Lawrence were looking for a supportive partner to operate the pallet camp. Nobody responded. And some of what I've heard from folks that were genuinely interested in supporting that project is that ultimately they decided not to, because it's too risky. Because one thing goes wrong, where it's a very unforgiving environment in our community right now. Folks don't want to take risks. It's risky, but it is risky. And I just want to acknowledge that it's really hard right now to have our partners do more than they're already doing.
And when I talked to Jill and the team about this, I want to emphasize that point. In 2017, when the county first dedicated at that time $1.9 million of general fund property tax support to behavioral health on the path to passing a 1/4-cent sales tax to support behavioral health. There were a lot of us, some of us around this table, who, we didn't have it all worked out. We didn't really know exactly what we needed to do. And that plan, even what we thought we knew we needed to do, it has evolved and changed multiple times. We have experimented. We have done pilots. We have learned. Some things worked, some things didn't. And this community came together and supported elected officials who approved those tax increases, additional funds, and a community that voted to support those dollars. It's taken us 5 years to get to the point where we are today, where we have a treatment recovery center open, and dozens of services in place in our community. Are we done? No, absolutely not. Do we have a lot of work to do? Absolutely. But I think it also took 5 years for service providers to sort of trust that leadership was going to be in that space, and that we had a commitment to fund the work, and give cover for community-based organizations that fundraise to pay their bills, to trust that the money would be there to do this. That's the risk. These are agents. Dana's agency raises charitable philanthropic dollars. If she's on the front page of the Journal World as the operator of a supportive campsite, and the community doesn't give her grace to sort of work in that space, will that impact her ability to maintain her operations? The same goes for a dozen other community partners,
Including the city.
including the
like
city of
a lot
Lawrence
of-
and Douglas County
Yes.
in this space. So it is, I'm worried about that because, you know, as hard of the work as it has been to advance behavioral health over the last 5 years, we had leadership and we had funding and we had a community that was 100% behind us. I don't know that we're in that same place right now.
I want to real quick say, you know, the folks that are taking the risk right now, I continue to be amazed at the city of Lawrence stepping into a space that's really hard and uncomfortable. And they've taken a ton of risks and acknowledged that they haven't always gotten it right, but they're trying to do better. And so I want to make sure that we're supporting them as much as possible in this work as well. And I hope we can all just stay on the same path together.
This is less about what I think observed in the feedback sessions and more about my reflection upon the process and some of the challenges is that I think there's a difference between building a plan and creating strategies and developing a vision and having community vision. And I think there was more semblance, there was a more presence of vision as it addressed mental health and the development of the crisis services that the community was asking to fund and develop. And I think we have a lot of work here to engage from a leadership perspective, the community on, constructing, illustrating a vision. And where do we see ourselves being and what does that look like? And really, again, illustrating the outcomes that we can achieve and the benefits that are included in that vision for what a better community looks like, what a healthier community looks like, and what are the real palpable, profits that we make as a community when we realize that vision. We can get pulled down into the weeds. And I think that's the listening sessions really highlight the extent to which a lot of those details divide us. We were really divided around very specific components of what we observe happening in the community, substance abuse, mental illness. And it's without that vision, I think that we end up bickering and remaining divided over those details. So something like a unifying vision to help the plan move forward. And this is the work that I see we need to do in this space. But
And I really hear that we have a lot of community will. We have a lot of community will to address homelessness in our community. And some of it is we're not using the same language as each other as different groups. We're not necessarily talking about the same things. Some folks want to see the problem fixed as opposed to the people served, but we need to just recast it. I think that the community will is there. I think our community really cares. Some people we have to frame it in terms of like the human cost and the economic cost of doing nothing, which we're beginning to see and live with, that there is a cost to many, all of us by not doing anything. And I don't think that's acceptable to our community at all. So I think people are a little worried about the dollars that we put forward in this. And I think that that is reasonable. And but recognizing that there's a cost now also. So we have to continue to make our case, but also to hear from people where they're coming from. I think there's some misunderstandings in the community about like the term housing first, as if that is like housing only, whereas at the county, we really talk a lot about supportive housing. What do people need to be successful? What do people need to follow their own vision of what success or independence looks like? So that when I hear folks push back against the idea of housing first, as we kind of unpack that, it really feels like, putting someone in a roof and expecting the landlord to take care of them. And that's, I don't think anything that would be supported by partners, city, county, or anyone. So it really is about how do we treat people as humans and kind of recognize that there's a human right for housing, but also that there's a level of responsibility for helping people have agency and helping them take agency over their lives for healing and for moving on. So it's not just housing people, and yet we have a significant, serious lack of housing at all levels, and that causes price to go up and rents to go up. So we really need to have eyes, and I think this plan does have eyes on the whole spectrum of housing issues that we have, from homelessness through market rate housing and having enough of it, and continuing to be able to develop that. So I feel more hopeful than maybe I'm hearing here. And I just want to say it is incredibly hard work, and our community is incredibly hard on the people that do the work they care about. The fact that we're all feeling the push means that our community really does care. We just have to figure out how to engage in the way that they are looking for us to.
Yeah, I appreciate those sentiments, Commissioner Willie, and I agree. I feel hopeful too. And of course, it is also daunting. It's a whole mixture of things, right? Realities, fears about the unknown, factors we haven't fully figured out, and knowing that that's going to be a constant work in progress. But I do feel hopeful about the energy of the folks who have, Jill, you said this work group in particular, which is, a large umbrella with lots of focused work groups underneath it, has been working diligently for 2 years while the conversation has intensified and the problem has escalated. And that is not unique to our community. We are feeling it, and so is everybody else in most parts of the country, including Garden City, Kansas, which is not a place where you think that homelessness exists. And I go to a documentary screening last night, and that is a topic of conversation about how that community is having to face what homelessness looks like, which necessarily hasn't been a visible thing. And so to your point earlier, Commissioner Willie, there's increased visibility. And so that comes with increased reactions. And there's a difference between reacting and responding to things. And our duty as local governments, and what all the social service organizations and folks, humans helping humans in our community, are focused on, is how to show up for people and support with whatever we have possible, and how to respond to their needs with whatever resources we have. And there's a difference in responding and reacting. And the cycle that most service providers are in is one of feeling the impacts of scarcity in terms of resources and burnout, because as a culture, like our country and our economic system does not value helpers and care workers in a whole host of positions. And I think personally that we are seeing some significant impacts of that show up in our communities. And it is an escalating issue because we are burning out care workers at a time when we need more of them and we need the most of them. And the resources can't come fast enough, or aren't coming fast enough. I won't say can't, because I think we're a creative community and we're going to find all the little nooks and crannies of policy and fun. If one thing that I think our community is good at is finding other places to draw down funding. But what I think has been stated by a number of folks in this conversation today and throughout the listening sessions is that community buy-in, community will, and community trust it's the point of struggle, and it's the emotional kind of sticky, icky part that's hard not to have big reactive emotions to be angry and upset about what somebody else's perspective of or definitions of beliefs about things are. And sometimes I watch us, and again, I don't think it's unique to our community. It's just important to observe, be stuck in a cycle of reacting to each other and defensively posturing towards each other, instead of trying to come to the table and figure out how we start saying yes to more people and more opportunities for access points and funding options and new ways of housing people that, maybe our current city code doesn't allow for, or, educating people about what you can do with vouchers, such as that if two single people have vouchers, that they can find housing together and they can help share that cost. Some of those things are there's a lot of creative solutions, and I have confidence that our community is going to figure out how to piecemeal those together. But it is, I also firmly believe, and I think we've already seen evidence of, it's gonna get worse and feel worse before it starts to feel better. And I just believe that that is a reality of our country's economy and social system right now. And I think that as elected leaders and, all the community partners that we've had really engaged in this, our role is to hold the line on what is right and necessary for our community to float everybody's boats to the top and and I firmly believe that if we're focusing on the most vulnerable, the least resourced, and most disenfranchised by all kinds of systems folks in our community, that if we can figure out how to better serve those people and help stabilize them, and we learn how to do that well, then everybody, it's a domino effect, and it really does have impact all the way to that market housing rate, right? And the impacts that people in middle class are feeling about their ability about what their income looks like now versus a few years ago. There's a domino effect to be had. But to your point, Matthew, I really do believe that we have to spend some time talking about community vision and what does it mean to take care of each other and accept that everybody has a right to housing, period. And that there are a variety of ways to achieve that. And it looks different for different people in a whole host of circumstances. And all of those things are valid. And we just have to figure out a way to get there and hold the line that it's the right and necessary thing to do. And I believe that most people in our community believe that too. And that I want to bring everybody else along the way that we'll get there and get to a space of recognizing that the ripple effect of that is positive in a whole host of ways, right? Like that the visibility of human suffering becomes less noticeable and less upsetting for people, both the people experiencing it and the people who are feeling discomfort with seeing it. So I, for everybody that's around this table and folks that are in the bleachers, as I like to call them here, and online that have been working on this, I have an immense amount of gratitude because I know that hard conversations are, well, obviously hard, but really taxing and draining, and to sort out how you feel about what other people say and believe, and how to sort out the effective way to respond to those feelings and reactions that you're receiving. That's tough work to do. And it's a lot of emotional labor. And I just want to recognize that we're only, sort of at the tip of the iceberg, and you've already expended a lot of energy and work, and appreciate that and hope that we keep having more and more productive conversations. And something I appreciate about where we're at today is just the frankness and honesty of knowing that there's more to learn and understand better so that we can come up with some concrete plans. That said, I will say, from a county perspective, I'm interested in identifying, by the end of this year, really knowing some tangible investments that we are already making and that perhaps we need to grow to really increase that capacity issue that we're talking about with some of the agencies and projects we're funding. And, I think that there's different types of policy level conversations, but aside from the, building of units like peers and supportive services that the county is already heavily invested in. And I believe that we are committed to continuing to really align our budget in a way that shows that that's a significant value, because that's what's sustainable about, it's going to take time to build the amount of units. And we do need multiple solutions, including brand new units and landlords who are willing to work with agencies again. But we need to start funding the services and that capacity piece now, and peers especially, and I'd be curious, I guess, Bob, to hear maybe just a brief summary of like, right now for the public to know where peers are sort of placed and maybe some of the agencies that don't have peers placed, or programs or projects that, might be a good fit or have interest, if I'm right about that conversation.
So there's been a lot of growth. There's been growth in the agencies that had peers embedded in them when we started. And how those agencies are deploying peers differently now. So for example, if you talk to Bert Nash and looked at their community peer support program 5-6 years ago, they had, I think, 7 people on staff serving clients. Most of those were half-time peers. Now you have full-time peers on the mobile team, full-time peers working with homeless outreach. The community peer program at Bert Nash is larger. The same would be true with DECA. There are 3 full-time peers on that social detox project, for example. So on the usual suspects, or where we started, there's been growth within their agencies and how those peers are deployed. And then there's been experimentation with where else could peers be deployed. We had some good initial success at Lawrence Public Library. We had some good progress at the Lawrence Emergency Department, and we discovered some things. We discovered that in intense crisis environments, peers are often triggered, and they discover that that work is not appropriate for them, and that's not the best place or environment. So that makes sort of maintaining that workforce for that purpose challenging. DECA and Bert Nash have a challenge to figure out how to best deploy peers in the TRC. That's a new environment. It's a crisis environment. We'll get there, but that's the learning that our established partners are doing. And when I say established partners, I'm going to turn to the other groups. So, I mean, I think Family Promise is a great example. We have 2 peers. County provides funding for half the cost of that. Family Promise meets halfway. And so they have 2 full-time people that are working and serving their clients. Those peers this afternoon were in a meeting with the city, with Justice Matters, with folks from the JAX Project, all folks that are trying to figure out how do we make more progress on helping to deliver food, more with more opportunities than currently exists. There are a lot of food pieces of our system that have been disrupted and broken and gone offline. We have some reassembling to do. So I'm excited about the peers that have worked there. Heartland Radac is now deploying recovery coaches full-time. They're trying a peer first response. So if you looked at where we were, I think just in the Peer Fellows Project alone, we have had 35 people spend a year developing a year at least, developing their peer skills, developing their professional, developing professionally, developing personally, learning how to manage the intensity of this type of work. And I think that 28 of those have completed a year or more through that particular program and have transitioned to full-time employment. So peers that have started in one place are now working in transitions. We have peers that are working in Carwoo's program at Artists Helping the Homeless. That's all staffed with peers.
Yeah, that's the best example is we've been investing in 100% peer run organization in Artists Helping the Homeless for over 3 years now. And we know it works.
And I think we also need to move beyond peers and using that term as we need to leverage lived experience. Not just lived experience with serious mental illness, but lived experience with homelessness, lived experience with generational trauma, lived experience with domestic violence. We need to figure out how to harness, develop, train, and deploy that lived experience in a helpful way. And we're learning a lot, and there's a lot more opportunity ahead of us. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but
in addition to peers, when I look through the list that was put up of programs that are currently supported by the county, I see some amazing wins and some amazing work going on here. We're not starting from scratch. We're actually starting from a place that most counties would be greatly envious of in terms of having the number of partners and the amount of work and the amount of experience going, as we go into a larger, more strategic tackling of homelessness and housing issues. So I think we have a lot to be proud of, and I just don't want us to lose track of that. Commissioner Reed was talking about community and caregivers, and this message isn't so much for those that are sitting at the table as kind of the community at large. Like, this is not a government problem. This is not a partner's problem. This is a community issue, and everybody listening and everybody who's not listening has a responsibility to their connections, whether that's family or neighbors or friends, or if you don't know someone, we'll find you someone. There are people that need the skills that they have to reach out, to keep them stable, to keep them from falling into a situation where they are struggling with housing, or struggling with substance use, or struggling with a mental illness that gets worse. I think we all have an obligation there. So I guess when I do hear back from the community in some of the listening sessions, the people had some very harsh things to say. I just want to hold that mirror up and say, this is everybody's work. It's not government work. It's not our, these partners' work. We're carrying a lot, but we need everybody or it won't work.
Commissioners, I didn't mention it. It was in one of the things that we're funding right now, but in the management memo today, there's an update from Gabby and the Housing Stabilization Collaborative about some of the numbers that she and Jasmine are seeing with that program right now that are very real in terms of what impacts we're seeing today and meeting the need to keep folks housed. And when Gabby and I talk about that work and the increasing demand on those funds, even though there's a lot of money there, there's a whole lot more than there was before the pandemic. We're not going to be able to fund our way out of all of this. There's room for policy change, and that's a huge part of the work that the work group that Gabby and Leah Roslin with the city are doing with the affordable housing work. What are the policies that we need to have in place that can help us make progress with the funds that we already have dedicated to this? So there's some really good information in your management memo that Gabby put together.
One thing I want to mention, is I'm imagining if Commissioner Kelly were here, that perhaps he, might say something to the effect that he said before, and that kind of gets at your comments earlier, Commissioner Willie, and your comments, Shannon, about, who else to talk to, and to talk to folks who may have adversarial opinions or challenging questions and beliefs about the work that's being done. And Commissioner Kelly, I'm just giving him a shout out because I want to give him credit, because he always kind of brings up this line of talking with some of our partners. And I think it's an important one here, and it's necessary. I also want to add and challenge that we can think about how we frame those conversations, and think about unfortunately, we live in a real binary loving world and society who likes to make everything this or that, one or the other, us or them. And I, think that there's a whole lot of things wrong with that. But this community conversation is sort of another version where we are falling into that binary trap of talking about folks experiencing homelessness or housing instability, and landlords who have housing to provide. And the conversation has obviously been pretty tense in our community recently at times. And what we haven't been hearing, and what I'm interested to hear, because I know the stories exist and I know the people are out there, are landlords who do accept vouchers, who Family Promise maybe has unique relationships with, or the community shelter or other emergency services in our community that have built relationships with folks who provide housing. And a lot of times it is supportive housing, even if it's sort of not formally structured that way, but they are working with somebody at some agency, and maybe it's even resident services at Housing Authority who is helping them stay stable, who accept a lot of vouchers. And, there's a lot of pressure points on this issue right now that, again, is happening nationally. And one of those pressure points that's been talked about a lot is huge corporations buying out large amounts of properties, right? Large apartment complexes, large portfolios of several, that's happening everywhere in our country and it is absolutely happening here. So it has changed the landscape of who owns rentable properties quite significantly. And so it can be very easy to feel frustrated by and only focus on the conversations about, you know, private landlords or quote unquote small landlords who have either sold off their properties or decided to stop taking vouchers. But, you know, there are also other stories. And similar to downtown businesses, there are stories of downtown business owners and employees who work downtown who have great relationships and really caring and, you know, symbiotic relationships with the folks who are visibly experiencing homelessness and spending their days down on Mash Street or in the surrounding area. I'm interested in us hearing those stories too, because to me, that's what can help introduce and infuse a little bit more hope. And also just tips the scales a little bit, right? We don't have to give so much power to the naysayers, if you will, or people who are only showing up critical to a conversation with seemingly, you know, if they make it clear that they're not interested in evolving in a conversation and coming to understand other perspectives, we don't have to focus on only that, right? We can uplift other stories and talk about other ways of conducting your business and how to respond to people in our community.
And to that point, we would be remiss to say that, you know, we had a lot of great response to our landlord liaison and the ESG grant and the money that we got from the county and the money that the housing authority also put for this. And we have recruited great landlords, people who took on people with some difficulty in staying housed, and those are absolutely true. We are actually, I mean, and you are actually doing that work, and we have those stories, and it's true. I mean, the vast majority of the landlords that we work with are great and really try to work with our tenants when they run into some trouble.
We've come to the end of our time together, but I wanted to just check in and see, I know you'll take this to the City Commission July 11th. Are there things that you need from us?
I think just on that last slide, we talked about, you know, where we're gonna go from here. Just if any of that sounded off to you, I'd love to hear it. But we're gonna keep working on the plan, and I think, you know, we'll come back to you all toward the end of this year or sooner as we make progress on this plan. But if there's other opportunities for conversations around some of those immediate needs, if there's those opportunities, I think between our city and county leadership, if there's more work that we can do in the short term, this group's ready to do that and dive in.
All right. Anything else anyone wants to share? Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you tremendously for the work that you do. So with that, we are recessed until our 5:30 business meeting.